Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Derrick Broze is joining me again today to discuss a few different things. We're going to start with some frustrating developments on the censorship front in regard to a platform that we have been using, focused on him in particular right now, but it's amazing how this conversation never seems to stop. We're going to talk about something that I recently covered on the show from his amazing research around the GMO conversation. It has to do with Mexico, a man named Mr. Monsanto, or coined as such, and the infuriating story of what we're going to get into around how the U.S. government is essentially forcing what we should all be able to understand by now is dangerous GMO foods on specifically corn in a place that has thousands of years of tradition and indigenous cultures and species around, or rather variations of food around corn in particular in Mexico, and being bombed with this GMO, really ticking time bomb of genetic manipulation. And we're also going to talk about a few other things that Derrick's been covering that are important to discuss, and as well as the upcoming People's Reset that I'm personally really excited to be part of, but that we're all excited to get to. So Derrick, how are you today, brother? Good to see you. You're muted.
Muted on StreamYard, not on my computer. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so let's get right into the wise part of this, man, because I'm just still like we were just talking about this before we started. I'm still like frustrates me that just this one thing after another, right? 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Oh, if not 2 steps back, over and over and over, which makes what we do, substantially more difficult just because we don't, that's not a fair shake in all of this, right? That people in our field, and again, there are people that I argue are out there misinforming or being dishonest or whatever, and it's still about censorship. My point is that I argue we're coming from a very objective, fact-based point. Many of the things that we were censored on, myself included, around, whether shots can cause myocarditis, and PayPal says you're a misinformer and takes $6,000 from me. And now we all know that's true. It's just one step after another. Wise, frustratingly enough, is something that we've been using, like TLAV in particular, because it was something that was another option. I gave it a shot. I've had a few different issues here and there. I brought it up on the show, but as of today, Derrick is finding out they have frozen his entire account with money and different things that have to do with with the People's Reset, with all sorts of different things going on. And just because, really, I'll let Derrick explain it. So from what I'm hearing, no real explanation other than red flag, whatever that ultimately means. So let's go ahead and start there, Derrick, because I know everybody's very receptive to this conversation. It's amazing really quickly at a point that we were at not long ago where this is fake and you're a liar and they just, you just did something wrong. Remember the YouTube days where nobody believed you're being censored. It's funny how far we've come, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because even this morning I've had a few people try to victim blame to me for not wanting to play the games that Wise is currently trying to make me jump through, as if it's my fault for not, joining the system and just getting along like, most people. But yeah, for those who don't know, Wise is, it's actually a whole interesting topic. I won't go down the rabbit hole, but Wise is an online payment platform. It's not like PayPal. It's similar, but what it's actually considered is called a neobank. And we might have talked about this before, but this is, of course, something new that comes along with the internet. So these are banks. They're not even really classified legally as banks, but that's just what they're nicknamed, neobanks. So they're financial institutions, let's say, that do not have physical locations. Like there's no members, there's no ATMs or anything like that to go check out. It's all online. It's all just digital platforms. And you can either have an account on your computer like I do, or through the app, and essentially you can hold and receive money. But what makes Wise useful for somebody like me who does travel a lot is you can easily move between multiple currencies. You can exchange it within the platform, etc. And so, yes, I don't use banks, and I haven't used the banks since 2008. And Wise is the closest I've come to that. And I just started using it about 2-3 years ago. Namely to receive payments from people who want to support my work, which I'm just so grateful for, of course. But platforms like, I used to be on Patreon. They started censoring, all kinds of people, including myself. So I left Patreon. I joined Buy Me a Coffee. I used to receive money through PayPal. Then I stopped using PayPal. So with Buy Me a Coffee and with Substack, you basically need a bank account. And since I don't have a bank account, Wise sort of fit the equation. And so I had to get for me, it's like, all right, here I go. I start taking one step and it just leads to more. So to get Wise and then get money from these other places, or for people to make payments with their credit cards to buy tickets to the People's Reset, I have to get a Stripe account to receive that money. So now I'm doing Wise and Stripe, and both Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are invested in Stripe. It doesn't make me feel good, but the majority of you out there are not using crypto and are still using these legacy systems. And since I need that support, thankfully, Ryan, and through your support again, can pay me to write articles. But for the most part, I need to receive funds, through support, monthly supporters. And so I've had a Wise account for 3 years now. And other than the random weird hiccups you were describing earlier, it's worked smooth for the most part. Traveling internationally, having a card to use that I can, pay with things, and I can pull the money out easy and transfer and all that fun stuff. Now, ideally, of course, I prefer crypto, but it serves a specific purpose. And actually, in my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, where I sort of describe how I live non-banked, I wrote about Wise actually. And what I wrote in the book was that things like Wise are just temporary half steps, half measures that won't last forever, because, you can sort of exist. Okay, I don't have a bank, but I'm using a neobank. But eventually they start asking a lot of questions. And I did not get any official answer for why my account started getting messed with in the first place. It was just all of a sudden last week, I noticed that my account said that my, some incoming money was paused and they needed more information from me. This had happened to me maybe 1 or 2 months ago, and I kind of just ignored it, and then it went away after a couple of days. And so I was hoping that was what was going to happen this time, but it's been more than a week now, and I decided, look, I got things to pay for. I got money on hold from our event, from people buying tickets, and it's payday and it's time for rent and all these fun things. So I started getting on the phone with them, and basically I was told if I can't provide a bank account, if I wasn't willing to provide a tax history, if I don't have an employment contract, if all these different things, which for the most part I don't have those things, then they weren't going to let me receive these things. And so I started trying to jump through the hoops. They asked for 30 days of receipts of my freelancing work, and I tried to explain, like, I know you guys don't really get it, but I'm just a person and I exist. And, I'm, I guess, what you would call a YouTuber. And so people support me. And so there's not a contract with these people. It's just people who voluntarily choose to support. But nevertheless, I sent them 30 days of payments on screenshot from Buy Me a Coffee, from Substack. They told me that wasn't good enough. They needed 90 days. So then I did the same thing. Then all of a sudden that's not good enough. And basically it came down to, if I don't have a bank account, which to me totally defeats the purpose of having something like Wise, then they weren't going to give me the money. And last thing it was at last night was that, okay, we'll allow you to give us a family member's bank information and then we'll send the money from there. That was like the only thing. Like, keeping the account wasn't an option anymore. And then this morning when I woke up and I tried to log in, the entire account was frozen. Like, now when I log in, it just says, your account has been closed. You can appeal this if you want. I can't even see my balance. I can't even see, those 12 transfers that have been paused for a week now. I can't even see those anymore. So which kind of does worry me, because I don't remember exactly how much money was in there. I don't know the exact amounts that were incoming. I mean, I can look on Stripe or Buy Me a Coffee and Substack and try to compare and contrast. But if they were to give me, just a couple $1,000s, I really don't know if that's exactly how much money was in there in the first place, if it does indeed get sent to my family member. Right. So far, I've been told it's on appeal. They're going to look at the information. This process could take up to 10 days for them to confirm it. And then if they like it, then they will send it to my family member and I can officially be done with Wise.
Well, that's, by the way, what, not to, be pessimistic about it. Hopefully you get it. But what PayPal said, right? They gave you a 6-month window. And of course, most people I talk to that have been in that position never, ever saw it again. Same with me. But, it's the same dynamic, because all they have to do is...
I was going to ask if you ever actually did get it back from PayPal or not.
Nope. Never saw a penny. And so, the point is that you can argue, you can clearly see that it's about, the point is they know that they're above the law in that sense, right? That who is going to hold them accountable, right? They're, if eventually you tried to basically spend 20 times more of that amount to try to get it back from them, which is what it would amount to. That's the whole way the legal system is set up these days. You would ultimately have to go through all these hoops where they would say, and it's easy after the fact to say, this is what they would argue. Like, we hold it to make sure that you don't have any outstanding issues that we have to resolve because you were clearly an illegitimate user, that's the way they do it. And so ultimately make up some excuse about how we had to cover our costs for the investigation, or that's what they would do. Like, I've gone through it to a degree and read people's stories about it, is that it's just, the people that of course would be there to try to go through this process, the judge, whatever else. I mean, they lean towards these businesses. They see us as you just highlighted, outsiders, the illegitimate entity that is trying to maneuver the system on the black side, the opaque side of it, and it's just not the reality.
I think in my particular case, without getting into too many details, but people who know my work will probably understand what I'm speaking about. I definitely, the further I would get into this would probably raise more problems for myself anyways. And that's why I was hesitant to even start answering any questions for Wise, because I think you would probably feel similarly. And I'm sure many in the audience that what, myself as a free person and you or anybody out there who chooses to support me or to buy a ticket to an event that, I help co-produce, whatever we choose to do in between each other, those are voluntary interactions and exchanges. And I really don't think the government has anything to do with it. This is, of course, kind of part of a bigger problem but I do believe in private property. I do believe that companies should, for the most part, be able to run things how they want. And in this case, giving Wise the most charitable interpretation, as people know, the shit runs down the hill, right? So Wise is being regulated like a bank, even though they're not a bank. And in their mind, they're not going to make an exception for me, one user out of how many other millions or hundreds of thousands of users they got, especially if I can't give them the documents that everybody else just readily hands over. Here's my tax record, here's my bank account, whatever. If they were to allow me to continue to operate, and then for whatever reason later on, something happened, then they would be liable. That's how companies definitely going to operate and think. A corporation especially is like, if this person's doing illegal things, which I'm not, but if they believe what I'm doing is illegal, or I'm not filling out the proper paperwork or whatever, I don't have the proper documents, then they could be held liable for that. So it's just this built-in fear that the system has, that the state really has, that, okay, whoever doesn't comply, whether it's with taxes or bank accounts or keeping your records or whatever. Because again, they say, okay, are you a business? I'm not a business. I don't have an LLC or anything registered anywhere. The Conscious Resistance is just a website. I'm just a guy with a hobby who does videos and talks to people, right? As far as they're concerned. So, but because I don't have all these different things that are sort of, our world in 2024, 2025, people expect that these are normal things, that's just how life operates. And that's just the cost of doing business. The only thing consistent in life is death and taxes, right? That whole mentality, it builds in the system that if you try to even not exist completely within that, it is increasingly difficult. This is why I wrote the book and warning about that. The further these technocratic systems become, and we're not even talking about full on social credit scores or anything. We're just talking about basic debanking. And when it gets more integrated, it's only going to be more difficult to try to maneuver without playing every one of these games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I get your point, and that's a fair point to make. Like, I mean, obviously I'm going to point out that just as like a principled point, I think Wise doing that is weak, right? But you make a fair point that like they work in an ecosystem where their objective as Wise is not to fight for free speech, or, that's not what they're trying to accomplish. They're just trying to be a business. And the point is that the system is set up in a way that pressures that to be the reality. But I still would not pull away from highlighting that that's the, I just don't expect
not to excuse them.
Well, yeah, but I would expect a company like Wise to step up and take that hit for Derrick Broze, right? But I'd like to see that. That'd be nice in a world that would happen, but I wouldn't expect that. But it's important to see that's the way it's set up. And clearly, what business do they have to ask what's the difference? Like, unless there's, here's my point. I don't think there was a flag. I don't think there was like, ooh, that's a suspicious transaction. I think there was too many issues that came up in that conversation. Right. So, or somebody decided to poke at this and say, investigate that person, whatever it is. And all of a sudden it becomes, well, now because you don't have these things that, by the way, I never had to verify to use Wise. Right. And I'm sure that's probably coming, that shoe will drop, but like forcing into this to create the justification to just push you out of the system. Like, for example, you're telling us, maybe that money will end up in your family's account, but you already said that they were mentioning the idea that those funds might be frozen. And so your point is like, these are people that made the conscious choice to send you money. What right do they have to say never mind and send it back? Like this is a whole, like at the very least, if you wanted to look at this objectively, they could say, well, here's what you have done, but you don't seem to check all the boxes all of a sudden, so we're going to have to cut ways, but here's what you gained. Like clearly it was something more than that, in my opinion. I think that's very obvious. And so it comes into this idea of what we were talking about off air, which is about the banking. The reason I think it's about trying to connect it with a bank account, even though the argument is that's like superfluous and what we're dealing with here, is that I think it's about because the banking system through the credit scores, it is social credit. That's our version of that today. And so by tapping into the bank, it would have, I argue if you did connect it with a bank that you had, even if that's not the reality, they'd be like, oh, okay, well then you're definitely gone. They'd be like, you're out of here, because that's what they're trying to suss out, I think, is that you're not allowed to be a part of this.
Trying to get more information about me. And about my habits, and just like you said, that's part of the social credit, right?
Well, that too. But my point is that it's not just getting more information. It's that insofar as trying to further prove that they want to kick you off the platform is what I'm getting at. Like the decision was made that we need to get Derrick Broze off this platform. And I think that's what that looks like. That would be my opinion.
Yeah, and all I mean by that is like just to the point you're saying, like that we know that bank accounts have their own essentially credit, obviously the credit rating. So just based on that alone, they can take that information and compare and like, oh, look, this is what his bank account is rated at according to his bank based on his purchases, based on how much money he holds, what he moves through. Yeah, it's all about just being able to regulate our lives more and more. And, just before we get into the other stories, I do just want to make an appeal to our audiences. I mean, this goes to both of us because obviously I'm dependent as a writer of TLAV on those who support TLAV. If all the support dried up over there, then Ryan wouldn't be able to support paying me to do the articles that I do and that I appreciate and enjoy doing for all of you. That we do need new infrastructure. I mean, besides, like we were just saying, that Wise is kind of in an ecosystem that forces them and compels them to play the game. I wouldn't even be using these systems if we had alternative systems, which there are some companies that I'm learning about. And, obviously a lot of this is in the crypto blockchain space. There's a lot of people in our audience who are still like, I think just don't have a clear vision of crypto and blockchain. And they're just like, all of it's bad. Everything associated is bad. I've written about this. I wrote an article a couple of years ago. Is it possible to unite the pro and anti-blockchain crowds? And just talking about there's obvious benefits. Odyssey is a blockchain platform that allows censorship-proof video streaming, things like that. But then obviously blockchain can be a digital record that never goes away. And you could put somebody's whole history on that and governments can use that in bad ways. The point is there's a lot of new technologies that do exist. And one of those is crypto. And specifically, I'm speaking of privacy coins, things like Monero, XMR, which I do continue to use and continue to support. I just spoke at the Monerotopia event back in November. And that community are the kind of people who are thinking about how do we make sure we have new financial systems that can't debank people that are outside of the state's hands. And so for those who are still apprehensive about it, I'm not saying trust Bitcoin. We've talked about that in previous interviews, the Bitcoin co-opting and hijacking. They're going to use that, stablecoins, et cetera. There's clear, obvious problems that do associate with CBDC. And at the same time, somebody like myself has been using Bitcoin originally and then Monero and others since 2013 to transact without a bank and without a government. And to, I'm moving money around all the time through crypto in addition to Wise, but my crypto accounts haven't been frozen. I haven't had to call somebody in the crypto department and make sure I can get my own money. There is a huge difference. So if you do have this apprehension, I just encourage you to at least learn about Monero and learn that there are actually, for the moment, not saying it's forever, not saying that they won't ever crack it in the future, but still we have a moment. You could say, well, one day this bad thing's going to happen, but guess what? I've been using it for 11 years, and people were telling me that 11 years ago. So in the meantime, while you're afraid or you're complaining, you're saying, what if this, what if that, we have a window where not only can you transact your money and the government doesn't know anything about it, but you can support people like me and Ryan and make it a lot easier for us to do so without having to jump through these hoops of the legacy banking systems.
Yeah, I would agree. And definitely a couple more points on this and let's get into the other conversations for limited time today. But I think what's important is that and I've been developing this probably more so than ever over the last couple months in general, but I would go ahead and say that I think pretty clearly that Bitcoin BTC today has been hijacked. That's what I think. I think that's pretty obvious based on the deeper I go into this information. And the point being that it's the same as everything else we're talking about, that, ultimately the original idea, and this comes back to the same problem we're discussing today, is that we're talking about the reality, like the true nature of peer-to-peer transactions without needing some middle government entity, a bank, whatever, deciding whether or not, or, dictating these terms. And that's what the white paper, again, whether or not, and I'm still very much considering the possibility that the origin comes from the government, but whether or not, the point is, as it was written down, it was about peer-to-peer transactions where you did not need any permission, any government or anything. And in that even highlights the idea of the increasing of the block size so it could scale and eventually compete with things like Visa. Now, my opinion is very clearly that Bitcoin itself has been artificially held back with 1 megabyte size blockchain so that it couldn't do that. And now, and that's where you get the forks of Bitcoin Cash and even what I argue is the actual continuation of the real vision, which is Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, or BSV, because it's right now scalable and could compete with Visa. The problem is that even Bitcoin Cash is still held back to a point before that, which I think 2 gigabytes. So I think what's important to think about is that it's the same overall dynamic here, is about trying to create the illusion that we have something like that. So kind of patch over the problem, like, and the Fed, but here's your CBDC, right? It's like everything happening right now seems to be the same way. And what I think you're experiencing is this kind of shoring up the sides, right? Like we're trying to push everybody back in, like they need us to be involved in the system to be able to fold us over into this new structure while convincing you that that is what you've been trying to do the entire time. Like that's kind of how I see it right now. And it's an alarming thing. And I think it comes back to the idea of traceable, trackable money, right? Like we need to get just to a point to where you can't exchange with somebody in Mexico because they like your work unless they can track every moment you're doing it, why you did it, and what you thought while you did it. You know, that's where I think this is going. So leave it on that. I mean, comment.
Yeah, just to add to that, you're correct. I mean, I know that you've been covering, I've been covering it, and anybody, there's my article that I wrote when we went back to Bitcoin Nashville over the summer. And the interesting thing is some of the people I was pointing out in that article, including Howard Lutnick, who's, funding Rumble and was there speaking, part of Cantor Fitzgerald. Now Trump put him as Commerce Secretary. So all the sort of crowd from the Tealverse and the PayPal mafia that are jumping into crypto, as I was saying in that article back then, they were getting behind Trump. And sure enough, now they're all in Trump's admin in different positions. But the point you are making there is really important, Ryan, is that like they are trying to continue, like they want the financial system, as everybody knows, to go towards CBDCs. And at the same time, they've hijacked the supposed alternative, Bitcoin, because it was the first, it was the biggest. And now they've got that whole crowd either just thinking that Bitcoin is just about getting rich or that it's just a stock that you hold in your 401k or something like that. They don't really understand this idea, like you said, of a peer-to-peer currency, digital cash that can be used without government or banks. And thankfully, there are other projects that are working on that. And that goes back to my point of, look, I get it's a big, you don't have to understand the entire ecosystem to understand the utility of it and to be able to functionally use it, receive it, send it, etc. There's a lot of great resources out there for people to just get started. But like I said, I would encourage Monero. And just on that last thing, I do want to mention, just in case anybody who has been supporting me on Buy Me a Coffee and Substack, please don't immediately delete those things yet. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out a kind of momentary stopgap, but I would, again, encourage you to learn more about crypto. You can go to my website at theconsciousresistance.com/invest. And I have a link to my Substack, to my Buy Me a Coffee. I also have my crypto wallets there. But for those who want to go even, more analog, I do have a PO box that is listed there as well. And I can receive, mail and things there. And I'm grateful for the people who do send. I don't receive checks anymore. That was also another hassle trying to do that for a little while. But I'm more than happy to receive support that way. Anything you guys can do is always helpful. I'm just hoping that I can get through this next hoop and continue to do my work, because I guess that's maybe a good place to end this part of the conversation. Is ultimately these sort of actions just get in the way of what people like Ryan and I are trying to do, right? Like, I mean, they make it difficult for us to just reach people, to just do, we're not harming anybody. We're not causing any in trouble. We're just trying to get information out there, and people clearly want the information and they want to support and they want to listen and they want to watch. It is this system and the people who continue to support it and consent to it and endorse it and promote it that are standing in the way of us just being able to be free people, exercising our freedom of speech, exercising our freedom of expression, and freedom to associate by you guys wanting to support and listen, etc. So all of us are being sort of impinged on, and our rights are being violated by these types of actions. And I think that really at the end of the day, that's what it's about, is they're trying to, whether they know who Derrick Broze is directly, or it's just somebody who's like, oh, this person's paperwork doesn't line up, the effect is the same. It limits my ability to continue to be able to do this work. There are people that we know that, and this is why people have come after TLAV and after you, that would love if we couldn't afford to continue to do this anymore and would have to go find a day job just to survive and no longer be able to broadcast and share information and write articles. They would love that. And these types of attacks are part of that effort.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really is. It's a nonstop thing. And I think that's what, as we jump over to the next topic, it's about something that is trying to force us into a position where we have to accept whatever structure they're presenting so we can keep doing the work. And so what Derrick is highlighting in a big broad sense is just about exit and build and everything else. We need to find other paths, and I mean, I don't know how to build out a new internet or a new platform. It's like, so we're hoping there are experts out there that also are willing to put it all on the line for a new, a system that could effectively challenge the technocratic panopticon that we're all highlighting, and whether it's financial, whether it's platforms. So that's what we need. So hopefully there's good people out there that are willing to step up. So on this topic, and it's interesting, even the overlap between them, the idea of like from the food side of it, right? That we have the same kind of dynamic, which weirdly enough, even kind of interconnects when you go deeper into the biotech side of it all, right? But the idea being that we have like more these technologies that are being rolled out, not in our interest, that are clearly being highlighted to be dangerous, but yet still get driven in for various reasons. And this is in the specific conversation of GMOs, which obviously clearly overlaps with the N1-methyl pseudouridine modified RNA that is in all of these injections, mod RNA, which is the genetically modified thing. All of it's still in the same conversation. So this is Derrick's article. Actually, this is just showing you your kind of tag here where you can click the team and look at all the people. There's Derrick for you. Here's the actual article entitled "Biden Administration and Mr. Monsanto Continue to Bully Mexico into Accepting GMO Corn," which again really did like physically upset me because of how like I would go like evil. Like sinister, like how you to do this, knowing what you're doing and even to praise it. It's like same with everything else. It really gets under my skin. So walk us through what this is, how this started, what's going on here.
Yeah, and I know you've covered this, Ryan, so I'll try not to repeat too many things. I just want to share some points I think are important for those who haven't heard about this. First, you're right that there definitely is like this overlap in the conversation. If everybody remembers back in the beginning of the COVID 1984, before the shots were even out, I think, or maybe at the beginning, people were starting to warn about the dangers. And there was a meme going around that, and then the corporate media picked up on it and were trying to debunk it, that taking the shots is going to make you a genetically modified human. Remember that? So there's definitely this, and as you reported on the mod RNA, there's definitely an overlap between, in general, moving towards biotech, moving towards technocracy. We saw it during the Biden administration with the bioeconomy. This is all part of that. And I've written articles on that. But so this is the latest and hopefully not the last, but it definitely seems like it's the kind of conclusion for the moment, at least, of a battle between the Biden administration and the Mexican government that, Mexico just got a new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, in October. It was going on before she came into office with the previous president, AMLO. And the focus of it is that Mexico, as you were referencing earlier, Mexico is very rich in a history of corn, of maize, and there are thousands of varieties that have, hundreds of varieties have been existing for thousands of years, grown around this country. And it's just such a beautiful thing when you come into different communities and you see all the different types of corn that you've never seen in the U.S. U.S., of course, the major product that is GMO in the United States is soy and corn that are grown in like the Midwest and around the U.S. Mexico is the largest importer of GMO corn, actually, but not for human consumption. It's specifically for like animal feed, which is still not a good thing because there's some studies that show, that some of the impacts to the animals eating it may still pass through to the people eating the animals. But besides that, for the most part, it has always been that Mexico, we've already got our own corn. We've got, and corn's a daily thing in Mexico too. That's the other thing. Right. It's not just like something you eat once a week or once a month. People eat tortillas every day, corn chips, tostadas. Like this is, it's every part. It's a part of your every meal, every life, right? Everyday life. And so it's a big thing for GMO corn to get introduced here. And it has been banned, things like glyphosate for the most part. Now, there have been some studies about a decade ago that showed some parts of the country were already contaminated by GMOs because unfortunately, one bad part of the Mexican government being weak is that companies like Monsanto have tried to still get in the country and basically just give it to farmers and let them start growing because they know, as those who've studied GMO seeds know, that it's easy to cross pollinate and cross contaminate. So if you get the seeds in the country, before you know it, they're going to be there whether you want it or not. Right. And so there is some bits of that contamination in different parts of the country, but as a whole, it hasn't been found everywhere to the extent it is in the U.S. And so Mexico passed or basically made it known they were going to ban GMO corn from the U.S. for not only for human consumption, but for animal consumption. And that was what set this whole thing off, because you guys might remember during the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, he was all about, we're going to get rid of NAFTA. And so he created his own agreement, which was essentially just the same, but it was just, his, and it's called the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement or the USMCA agreement, just this massive trade deal. And, the thing about these trade deals, Mexico is I wouldn't say it's a fully developed country, to use that language, but it's not a third world nation. It's, it's a developing country, as some people will sometimes call. And so in these cases, when developing or, third world nations are working with the US and other bigger first world nations, they are often at a disadvantage because what they want is to improve their economy. And the US says, hey, look, we'll give you access to our markets. You can sell your goods here or we'll inject some cash into your economy, things like that. And of course they want that. And they also usually have to exchange something. And so by signing the USMCA, Mexico, for whatever benefits may have come, and this is a massive agreement, so I'm not going to say it's all bad, but whatever benefits they may have accomplished or received, they also still are bound by the entire agreement, including the bad parts. And so Mexico found out once they said, hey, we're going to ban GMO corn, that according to the US government, that violates the USMCA agreement, that you're not allowed to do that under article this and section this or whatever. They have these different arguments they've been making. So it's been going back and forth for the last couple of years. And I've written a couple of articles for TLAV tracking it as it's gone on. But just a couple of weeks ago, I think on December 20th, it came to a conclusion where this panel, which I couldn't find much of, just, as a side, I couldn't find much on this panel itself. I did find the 3 members, and they're all international. But again, I would wager and feel pretty confident in this bet that the people who are choosing who's going to be a part of the international trade panel that's going to decide, this decision, is the US right, is Mexico right, probably are leaning in the US's direction, whether they've got, they worked with them. And in fact, I did look up one of the guy, I can't remember his name, but he does have some connections to US politics and stuff like that. So I don't necessarily think we can call this like some objective, impartial, international panel that is just ruling objectively on who's in the right and who's in the wrong. Because as you were saying, like when you look into the arguments, it's actually pretty disgusting the way that the US government approached this. In the end, the USMCA panel did rule in favor of the US and said that none of Mexico's 7 arguments were, legally strong, and they were pretty dismissive, a lot of them actually, and just pretty much taught what I see as kind of like a sort of colonialistic, paternal, like, you're too dumb to understand the science. Like, none of the things you're saying are scientifically sound. None of the things are backed by science. And again, in a previous article, I actually showed, because the US has been saying this for years now, the moment Mexico said, we're not going to import GMO corn from the US is like, oh my God, everybody knows GMOs are safe. What's wrong with these silly Mexicans? And then Mexico actually did back off a little bit and said, okay, we're not going to do a total ban, but we are going to ban it for, and not in tortillas and not in this thing. So they kind of already sort of watered it down. But then the US was still not satisfied and said, no, you need to like completely let us bring in any GMOs we want. And that's basically what the panel ruled, is that Mexico, according to them, doesn't have a legal standing. And Mexico now has 45 days to comply, which, interesting, lands, I think it's in February, early February. And as I point out in my article, just days after the ruling came down, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, she gave a press conference, actually 2 press conferences, where she said that she's basically calling on the Congress to pass a law to ban GMOs outright. So they're like, all right, fine, you guys want to play games and say we can't do this? We're going to pass it through our Congress and see what can happen. And yeah, when Mexico was told in the past, I thought this was really a good move on their part. Of course, they didn't get enough attention. But when Mexico was previously told none of your arguments are scientifically sound, well, they decided, okay, well, we're going to get together our health department, our scientific department, and we're going to host an online webinar. We're going to present all the science that, we're basing our arguments on. Right. And they did that. Of course, it was in Spanish, but they're responding back and putting out the studies and showing the things that they are, they're speaking out about. And the US basically said, you guys didn't present anything scientifically sound. The Mexican government put together a database of all the studies they were referencing. The US government said the database is just a bunch of links. It doesn't, they just kind of downplayed it. Then the Mexican government had like an assessment. And they're like, well, this assessment doesn't satisfy international standards of scientific assessment. And Mexico's just like, we have, basically they were saying, and there's a really good quote, something about like biotech companies, you probably have it in there. Yeah. Saying that like, so she said, Claudia Sheinbaum said, talking about the corn and how, you save the corn seed and it gets passed on. And that's, of course, what we've known for a long time, that companies like Monsanto, Bayer, the corn that they make is made to not seed so that you have to keep buying the seeds. And so she said a part of the corn is saved, that seed is saved, and it's re-sown and used in the next harvest. This is very important because it does not depend on the farmer to buy the seed from a transnational company. And she basically said, like, they're not going to let the Mexicans become, kind of subdued to these biotech corporations that the US is basically already kind of under the thumb of. And there's a lot in there. I mean, I did put quite a bit of information in this article, but it's because I think getting into the nuts and bolts, the mainstream, of course, they just said, hey, the USMCA ruled in favor of the US, and that's it. When you actually read the 100+ page report, that's where you can see these horrible arguments that they're making that I highlighted in this article.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it kills me how ridiculous this is. It's like anything else we talk about where you have this weird cultish circle of like the journalists in the mainstream and governments that just yell a narrative like, I mean, not to make it about foreign policy, but, you know, Assad gassing children. I mean, the amazing amount of times that has been thoroughly broken down, like by Robert Fisk, for example, the Independent, you know, it doesn't matter. It's just the same old narrative comes back over. It's the same thing. Or fluoride in the water, right? How you have these same people sitting in front of groups arguing how we know this is healthy for your teeth and does X, Y, and Z. You know, and I genuinely think they believe what they're saying. It's just, and yet they're at some high level position where their job is to know these things, and yet they only learn what the written out narrative is. Like, for example, the hilarious statement that that's just a bunch of links. Like, think of, what are you saying? Links are that's everything. Links go to scientific studies. Links go to, but it's just, that's kind of the thing, is that you're not, the way people are being trained today on Twitter more than anything is that, like Twitter files, right? You don't give me a link. Don't give me some source material. Give me a narrative. Give me a screenshot. Give me, you know, that it's almost like the government has bought its own BS in that way. It's like, what are these links to studies? I'm supposed to have written out narrative. I'm you know, making fun of them, but I think that's kind of what they're doing right there. Is it's like, what am I supposed to do? My due diligence? Look at the links for myself?
It was just a total mocking and demeaning of the Mexican government or of the Mexican. And again, I'm not here claiming like the Mexican government's perfect or anything like that. But in this case, I do think they're taking a right stance. They're definitely, at least for whatever purposes, you know, we could debate or theorize about on what the real motive is. If you just take it at face value for the moment, the Mexican government's trying to stand up. And they even, to your point, they said that they were having a zero risk policy because they said none of the international standards, including the US's own standards, are enough to protect the Mexican people or their corn or, you know, their heritage, et cetera, because basically those standards were set to benefit the biotech corporations like Monsanto. And so Mexico was saying, okay, we're going to have a complete zero risk policy. And again, the U.S. said that the zero risk policy was illegitimate and it violated the USMCA. And so it's like they're trying to take a real strong stance. And the Mexican government said the adverse health effects of these contaminants and toxins have been scientifically demonstrated. And that quote, that they will not be coerced into ignoring the independent scientific evidence that indicates the harmful effects of transgenic proteins and pesticide residues in GM corn. And the U.S. is just like, no, we're not going to accept that. It's and then when they tried to bring up Mexico's big indigenous populations, which there's 3 states, including the one I live in, that have a pretty strong and thriving indigenous population. These are people that never were kind of mixed with the Spanish, that are still like the original peoples of Mexico. And corn again is very intrinsic to their lives. And when Mexico made these appeals and saying, look, we have, they mentioned the Mexican Constitution, they mentioned the, you know, UN human rights and just different things, whatever we feel about the UN, just saying like, hey, we're sticking to these standards and these standards and these standards and these standards, and name treaties and national, international laws that they said all are what they're following to protect the indigenous people. And the US government says that legal obligations to indigenous people are vague and highly generalized concepts, which such as protecting cultural heritage of indigenous peoples, and that these vague concepts do not constitute a concrete legal obligation. So just think about that the next time the U.S. government says anything about taking care of indigenous people.
Or any tangential point in all of that, like caring about cultural differences or care. Like, it's just hilarious to me that they come out and just tell you exactly what we're talking about. No, business and interest of our profit. Like, you know, it's just like pshaw. Who cares about treaties and agreements and cultural? I mean, it's almost as if they didn't realize that this would be seen by this many people. Like, that is so important. I remember, that's like one of the first things I talked about when I first read this after talking about it with you, is I'm like, they just literally showed you exactly who they are. Like, those things don't matter. What are you talking about? Cultural heritage, you know, and all they really care about is getting what they want from this. And so that's what's so hilarious. And that's my opinion, but that you can point to, I think, like objectively now broad, whether multinational evidence showing from multiple scientific studies that GMOs are dangerous. I mean, are we still, I mean, what, so are we supposed to believe that Bill Gates has saved the world? Is everybody eating to their heart's content? Well, no. So then his project failed, right? That didn't work out. The GMOs made India more food insecure, and all the cancer research has been very clearly shown. So Mexico is simply going the scientific evidence. They're like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, it's just such a clear, like, hubristic stance from the U.S. government that just shows that we're right, you're wrong, shut up. We don't care about anything else. Our data means this. And then you get all the people like Mr. Monsanto, who was Tom Vilsack, right? Standing up and saying, you know, it's a win for the biotech industry. It's just such a comical thing. And maybe it's just more transparently obvious to people like us, but I'm in the mind that this stuff is becoming very easy to see by average people, and that's
I
why
think so.
It's just a very transparent example of that. I think it's important. So
yeah, and I think one of the problems that we're facing with the GMO conversation is that much like vaccinations and fluoride, that according to the mainstream, only crazy people even question GMOs. We all accepted that years ago that they were safe. Forget about that whole March Against Monsanto movement years ago. We all know that it's safe. Everything's fine. I mean, and for people who kind of weren't around or maybe weren't tuned in yet, in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, when the March Against Monsanto was really getting going and it was massive. I mean, there was like 500 plus protests all around the world against Monsanto, people going to Monsanto headquarters, people marching the streets. And I'm not talking about just 10 people here and there, but there was hundreds and thousands of people gathered around the world, united against Monsanto, and it was making mainstream news. Of course, the mainstream hit pieces were coming, just saying these people don't understand science, etc. And, you got to look back at that time period, 2012, 13, 14. Who was the president then? Obama. And Obama was a huge proponent of GMOs. He was in the back pocket of the biotech corporations. And that's why Mr. Monsanto, Tom Vilsack, was Obama's U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, as well as they brought him back during Biden administrations. And during the Obama years, Vilsack was actually the person responsible for approving more GMOs than any USDA head at that point in time. And I think now he comes back into the administration with Biden. And what does he do? He helps cram this thing through and make sure that GMOs are going to be, exported to Mexico one way or the other. And it doesn't, they don't care about the science. They don't care about the people. It is, I think, at the bottom line, about the bottom line, about the money, but also, of course, just in that bigger picture of making everything genetically engineered, genetically modified, taking it further away from God, nature, whatever you want to say. Like, it's just like corrupting everything that we know.
Well, we actually forgot to touch on that. That's an really important aspect of it, is that you make an excellent point in the article that, as you already highlighted, if Mexico is, I would argue, like through not just Trump's trade deal, but everyone before it, being forced to do essentially what the U.S. needs from them, that's a huge financial aspect. If they're just like, never mind, we don't, they're the biggest importer of this GMO corn, and they suddenly say no, like that's a huge financial shift, right? And so clearly you can, even on top of all of that, you can highlight that that's sort of a propped up market, isn't it? If you're forcing them to take this, they don't even want it. And if they stop doing that, your market collapses. Well, this is the false GMO dynamic we're seeing right there, right? They're forcing this and acting like the world needs this. That's an important point. So the financial side of it, just
not even mentioning the GMO subsidies. I mean, that's the other thing too. Is like
touch on the financial side of it for me, and then get into Trump and whether you think he's going to continue this stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point there to wrap up with. So no, I think that really what you said there kind of outlined it, that Mexico is the biggest importer of US GMO corn. So go back to the beginning of, like you were referencing Bill Gates and everything, the beginning of the Green Revolution, the original Green Revolutions, the 1940s, Rockefellers are funding it here in Mexico again. They came down to Mexico with, I can't remember the scientist's name, but basically Rockefeller funded scientists came down here. They saw these indigenous people who were growing food the way they have for thousands of years and said, no, you're doing it wrong. What you need to do is start spraying pesticides everywhere. That was the first Green Revolution. And then we had what's sometimes called the gene revolution, 70s and 80s, obviously 90s, 2000s became a little more mainstream. They start working on these genetically engineered, genetically modified foods. The only way that market has really survived, because obviously people have an aversion to it, even without just, you could say it's, maybe a knee-jerk reaction, but when people hear genetically engineered and food, it's kind of like, I think I'll go with the regular food over here.
Yeah.
And that market is completely propped up. So companies like Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, and others, if you've driven through the Midwest of the U.S., you see the massive GMO cornfields. They receive huge subsidies from the U.S. government. That means they receive taxpayer dollars in their industry to help prop them up. So that's one angle of that. And then one way or the other, the U.S. convinced Mexico to start importing this stuff, and they eventually became the biggest importer of it. And now, as you said, with that sort of gravy chain threatened, with Mexico saying, hey, you know what, we're going to go ahead and just ban it altogether. We're going to get rid of it. We don't want this anymore. There's a lot of farmers and a lot of biotech companies that would stand to lose money if I'm sure they could convince some other country, probably unfortunately in Africa or somewhere else like that, to take it. But it would be a huge financial loss for them if Mexico does go through with this. So I think, again, we have the sort of technocratic biotech, bioengineered aspect of it, but even just on a plain financial side, there's definitely a huge financial incentive for the U.S. and for Tom Vilsack and the Biden administration to not let this one go and to not let Mexico just kind of push back and say no. And then in terms of Trump, I think there's also...
Let me jump in real quick before Trump. So I forgot to add this too. Just the idea being that the treaties aspect of it, or the idea that, so basically they're just simply saying that this is dangerous and unhealthy. And I think that's easily proven. And now they're going, well, too bad you have an agreement. It's interesting now they're going through the court process to try to pass laws and, constitution wise and say, we just will not allow this, which I argue would supersede any of this stuff. Like, obviously, if the U.S. government made it, like, we know how the U.S. government, like, let's also take a step back and realize how ridiculous it is that the U.S. government, who disregards any treaty, any resolution, anything they don't like, is going to force this on them because you have to follow the rules, the rules, right? I think that's important to note. But so it's interesting to see what happens if they do get that passed and the U.S. just goes, we still don't care. I think that's one of those wake up moments, but I wanted to include that because that's a huge part of it. And
it's just, like you said, it's the superpowers bullying the smaller nations. That's what's been going on for decades and generations. Like you pointed out perfectly, they don't follow the rules. They don't follow their own treaties. They violated treaties against their own indigenous people. So of course the U.S. government's going to say, those are just vague concepts. Come on. We know those aren't real legal arguments.
Perfect.
Because they've never kept to their own treaties. I mean, and that's part of the legacy. And I think that to me goes back to that, just briefly, that colonialistic kind of paternalistic mindset that they can just cram whatever they want on into a smaller, although Mexico is massive, but in terms of sort of GDP and just, strength in the world militarily, really, because they wouldn't dare try to challenge another nation that they felt could, actually push back. They feel like they can just cram this down Mexico's throats, and it's unfortunate. And I really hope to see some pushback that the Mexican government really will go through with this. Like I said, I don't trust the Mexican government. I don't have like faith in Claudia Sheinbaum. We'll see. Maybe she'll end up selling out and just let it happen anyways, like every other politician. Maybe not. Sometimes there are politicians down here in Latin America that do push back against the U.S. and really seem to be growing sick of the empire, the imperialism of the U.S., and that kind of gets into the conversation on the global South and the BRICS nations. I don't think that necessarily means these nations are the answer or something like that. But as far as Trump goes, I think people need to really take, like, in case anybody hearing this is like, okay, well, that's why we got to get rid of Biden, right? He's like, I got 3 more weeks, then Trump will come in and he'll fix this. This is Trump's like crowning achievement. This is one of his proudest moments of his first administration. There's no way Trump's going to let Mexico just get by this after he, went to such effort to make it happen and all this kind of thing. And they signed it in this big historic signing ceremony. Right. Like, this is definitely one of Trump's big achievements that he would like to brag about and has bragged about in his first term. So there's no way that Trump is going to just come into office and then shut this whole process down and let Mexico just go ahead and, stop importing corn. Doesn't mean Mexico won't try their own things, and I hope they do. But I absolutely think we should see Trump continue this process. And if at any point he's asked about it, I'm sure he will say, oh, I'll get on the phone with them and we'll get a deal done or something like that. He's already, in fact, he already has spoken with Claudia Sheinbaum since he became, since he won the election. There was some reports about them having a phone call and it was contentious. You guys might remember that. I mean, you probably saw it, Ryan. It was like some fake news story that went out with like Trump's going to send the military into the U.S., to Mexico or something. And they got on the phone and I don't know what exactly happened, but the point is they have talked. So I doubt Trump is going to just stand by and allow Claudia Sheinbaum to try this, but we're going to see, because apparently in a couple of weeks, whenever the Mexican Congress returns, they're going to pass a law and she's calling on her party. She has pretty much full control of the government at this point. So it won't be a difficult fight for her if they actually do try to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard because, it's very easy. It's an easy avenue to take to just go, well, you just don't like Trump. And, and that's not necessarily incorrect. I don't like any of them, but it's Biden, it's all the same thing to me. But the point is, it's not about making this about anything, so it's just an objective fact that you can look back, he's been very pro big business, and I would argue deregulation in ways that don't benefit average people, right? Like, not the way they're playing this game right now. It's like, if we're going to go deregulation, let's go de-government. Like, that's where that needs to go. Right now it's like deregulation, let them do what they want. This still hurts you and they benefit from it. But, it's like, it's the opposite of what these things are. Right. And as you said perfectly right there, it's like just some vague floated idea that, well, I'll step in there and it'll be ended right away. It's like, well, what does that even mean? You let everybody assume what you want to believe he means by that. It's tactful, I would argue. It's one of the things he's very good at, like giving that like right down the middle answer that lets people assume what they want. But I would agree with you, sadly, as I see all the indications, as GMOs being a part of it, that this is only going to continue. Right? This show I just did, Make America Healthy Again, in parentheses, with GMOs, pharmaceuticals, AI, and nanotech. It's like it's basically being stated out loud, but it's like the Elon version, or the whatever they see as the positive side. And I'm really only talking about the team sport politics. I'm day by day more and more convinced that there are a lot more conservatives in general that are just super uncomfortable about this, but just don't know what to do. And I think that's all the designed reality of where we're going with all this. So, I just hope people have the courage to stand up and push back on this stuff, because it's not slowing down. And I sadly see it only getting worse, but I hope they're right on that. But, any more comments on that article before we can kind of finish talking about hopefully where we can discuss more solutions about how to circumvent all this?
No, not really there. I mean, just briefly to that last point you're talking about the conservatives who maybe see what's going on, but don't know what to say or do. I think that's the real test, so in case there's anybody who does support Trump that's hearing this, or has been, and then now has a lot of questions related to Elon or Vivek or some of these other connections that people like us have been calling out, but now a lot of people seem to be paying attention. This is where you prove whether you're a cult member or not. This is where you prove us wrong, and you say, you know what? I did support Trump, but now I see things going wrong, and I'm not going to just be quiet about it because I'm afraid my in-group, my clique is going to hate on me if I, actually say something against MAGA, because that's what happens. Is a lot of these people realize, like, especially content creators, if I even just expressing an alternative opinion that's not immediately like, yay, Trump and Musk, can get you attacked and run out the room. And there are a lot of people afraid of that. And I get that that's a difficult thing to sort of overcome, but I would encourage anybody who is having those doubts, continue to explore them. And yeah, the guy's going to be in office in a couple of weeks, and I guess we'll see, but don't ignore the telltale signs of more of the same when you see them. Yeah,
I agree. And that's all we're really asking for, is just discernment, skepticism. That, it's like, I've said this a lot. And sadly enough, I guess I've never been able to prove it, because it never goes that way, which kind of should tell us something. But as I always say, if it actually happens that way, I mean, I will be the first one to go, thank God. You know what I mean? Like, and I think people doubt that somehow. I don't know why. It's like, why would we not want the positive? Like, if he does come out tomorrow and like ends the Fed and does all these things, and there's not some secret agenda behind it, why would we go, boo, bad Trump? It's like, that's the pettiness of the partisanship that we're all calling out. And it's like, I really hope we can get past that part of it, because it's just, and again, it's interesting thinking about that I've said that about previous discussions, previous political moves, administrations, and in every case, it ends up where it doesn't happen that way. So I'm not forced to come out, and not forced, but to prove that, essentially, because I want that to be the case. I want to see these things end like anybody should. I just don't think that's where it's going. I hope I'm wrong. But let's talk about solutions, because I think that's exactly, the perfect segue into exactly what this is all about, right? So upcoming January 29th, the People's Reset. So I guarantee our audience is very familiar with this, right? But go ahead and give a breakdown if they haven't heard about this, because I'm really excited about this. I mean, this is going to be a really fun event on top of everything else.
Man, I can't wait for you to come down, man. I've been excited to have you for years. So for those who are not aware, this event, we call it an activation. I launched it along with another activist friend, John Bush. We started having these conversations about it in late 2020. Obviously, COVID-1984 was going on. And you remember that everybody remembers the feeling on the internet. It was just paranoia, the Great Reset. We just heard about it a couple months before. Everybody's freaking out. Lockdowns are happening. We knew shots were coming. We could feel this palpable fear in the air. And we wanted to actually try to present some solutions. So we came up with the idea of what was originally called the Greater Reset. And in January 2021, the same week that the Davos crowd gathered, the World Economic Forum, we had a 5-day event that was focused on what we consider kind of a holistic approach. So, right, we talk about everything from technology, talk about liberating your mind, body, and spirit. So you got health in that front. Talked about building parallel systems like education models, currencies, et cetera. Talked about empowering technology. So how to use encrypted messengers, how to use health technology, how to, alternative sources of energy, all kinds of things that fit under that banner of technology. And then how to organize communities, how to get land, how to, if you want to go do a homestead, how to grow food, just exploring this whole range of 100% solutions focused. That was the main goal, is like, let's get together. Let's do what the Davos crowd does. They get together for 5 days with some of what they think are their brightest minds, and they talk about all these different themes. Let's do the same thing, but let's do it from the bottom up, grassroots, people-powered perspective, and let's make it 100% solutions focused. So the event doesn't have any talks debating, COVID or talking about this conspiracy or politics or any of that stuff. There's a million other places to do that. And, you know, it's important to do those things sometimes, but this is like 100% solutions focused. So every single speaker that is there is talking about, here's my ideas on how to help yourself in this area, in this way, how to grow food, how to learn about this topic, how to get out of the system in different ways. And it's been a huge success. We just had our 5th one last January in 2024. And at that one, we announced that we were sort of transitioning. We kind of completed this, this sort of chapter, I guess you could say, that we had gone through, and we had 5 events as the Greater Reset. And we decided, you know what, we were responding originally to the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, and we kind of wanted to step away from that, right? In some ways, it was a reaction, a response to that. But now we realize, like, we just want to chart our own course. So we just call it the People's Reset now. And it's still 5 days, all solutions focused. It does happen live in Mexico, in Morelia, Mexico, which is central Mexico where I live. It's about 4 hours west of Mexico City. And it's 100% free online. I'll mention that as well. So for those who can't come, you still got plenty of time to get down here. And the most expensive thing you need to do is get a flight. Food is cheap down here. Housing's cheap down here. It's, you know, there's plenty of opportunity once you get here. It's just getting your flight. The tickets are very affordable. And so, yeah, we put on this 5-day event. We stream it completely for free online through the website, thepeoplesreset.org, thegreaterreset.org. We also post all of the talks. I edit them myself on the People's Reset Odyssey channel. So actually I counted the other day, we have more than 430 hours of solutions-focused content, probably the biggest archive of solutions-focused content in the world, from the Greater Reset 1 through 5. And we just held our first activation in the UK back in September, the People's Reset UK. So this will be our 7th event that we're hosting.
Nice.
And it's 30 speakers. There's going to be 9 different conscious musicians. There's going to be concerts. There's going to be daily networking sessions. There's going to be dozens of different workshops. It's like really a decentralized way. There's concerts at night. There's going to be speed dating for people who need to meet someone. Perfect. There's ceremonies. I mean, it's really just a beautiful mix of all kinds of things. And what I like is that we get such a diverse crowd. Like, as you see right there on screen, those countries that are near everybody's names, it's just showing you where they live and where they're coming from. And you can see there's like a dozen countries just represented in the speakers. And we only have one virtual speaker this year. When we started during COVID, it was like mostly virtual, right? Now it's become where we want it as much in person. And we've got more and more speakers from Mexico. So that's something that makes us different than any other event that happens in Mexico or elsewhere, is that we actually are focused on local integration. So the entire event is completely free for Mexicans. Every single talk that is in English, Spanish speakers can check out headsets and hear everything live interpreted in Spanish. We put out all the talks in Spanish for free on our Spanish Odyssey channel as well. So
am I gonna have a rapid fast translator for how fast I speak? Is that going to work?
Dude, same thing for me. They'll actually remind us. They'll be like, hey, just talk a little slower when you can. But they do a great job, honestly. It's been very cool to see them work. They're just like in the back of the room in like their own little booth, and people come over and they, check out a headset, and you'll just see all the Spanish speakers sitting around the room with the headsets, just hearing everything. It's a really cool experience. And so we're making more effort this year to have more Mexican speakers, more Mexican vendors, because we really see there's a lot of exciting things happening in Mexico. Besides all the fear porn and all the craziness that, does happen in parts of Mexico, there's a lot of beautiful people out here. Because of the instability of the government, it also allows for more freedom in some ways. And so in that space, there's a lot of people trying to think about building parallel systems and the exit and build idea. And so we want to be able to connect all of the people that we've met here in Mexico and the people that we're getting to meet with the amazing people from the US, from Canada, from Europe, from UK that are a part of this community. And we usually get about 300 to 400 people come out in person. People hang out for at least a week. Like I said, there's all kinds of stuff happening. And Ryan, I'm excited because you and Whitney were a part of it like a couple of years ago, but it was through virtual when we were mainly virtual back in 2021. So this will be cool because we've changed. The first 2, we were in a different city, and then we moved to where we are now. We've changed venue a couple times. So you're coming like at the perfect time where the event is, working like perfectly. And we've got a great venue and just a great spot. And I think people are going to really get a lot out of being able to connect with you in person.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited about it. And really just to be able to talk on different points and play music and just be a part of it. I'm excited, man. It'll be great. And so I just think, go ahead.
I was gonna say, well, just to mention, like, so the thing that we're gonna be doing, I definitely want to get you to play some of your music, and we're gonna have a panel, an international independent media panel with me, you. There's this Mexican journalist named Ruben Lengues, who is actually used to be mainstream here in Mexico, but also he used to work for the Los Angeles Times and
Nice.
some of he was like a correspondent from Mexico for some of these U.S. based mainstream stations. But of course, like many of us, he had his wake up journey right during COVID, and since that, has gone completely independent. He's got a few 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, all Spanish speaking, and he's going to be on the panel. So it'll be me, you, Ruben, and then Dan Aston Gregory, who's another independent journalist from the UK. So it'll be really cool, like, having nice. Mexico, UK, and the US represented, and we're all just going to kind of dive into the challenges and like the importance of building that parallel system of alternative independent media.
Yeah, man. I think it's just that all of this is so important, not just the general objective of trying to focus on positive solutions for things that, everyone in this field knows that, like what we're doing right now is a huge part of this that can't ever stop. Like that's one of the other things that's always people trying to, I think, deliberately kind of throw the stick in this box, is acting like, stop this and get out there and do something. It's like, we'll both need to happen. Right. But we do need, and even my own experience in all of this, more over the last couple of years, like I've always taken real world action in my life in many different ways, but I'm more and more realizing that we really need, as you've been doing as far as I've known you, kind of rolling this momentum as best we can into other things like this. And whether that's just coming together as people and realizing that being in personal contact is monumentally important, which is one of the things they were attacking during COVID-19. We're just finding these solutions that fit, a human-centric direction, which seems to be the opposite of everything else we're dealing with. Yeah, I'm really excited about this, man. And I think this is, these events are changing people's perspectives, so I just thank you for putting this all together, and I'm excited about it, man.
I am too, man. And just to kind of make it full circle, I mean, this is, like I said, I started using Wise because of this event, because we wanted the event to grow from being like a little bit more grassroots to like, okay, we got to use some of those legacy systems so that we can allow the event to grow a little bit. And I'm grateful for that. And I just want to take it as far as we can. Like in my ideal vision, we do this event all the way till 2030. And every year we just keep showing people solutions, but not just coming back together and patting each other on the back. But I've already seen people will reach out, or they'll come back to an event and said, I came to the second one and now we have land. Now we're homeschooling our kids. Right. Like people who are actually taking the steps. And it's always a cool feeling for me to look out in the audience and see people taking notes, and they're really like taking it serious. They're really just there to learn. They're there to connect. And that's why we call it an activation, because people leave just feeling like, wow, like inspired, activated, motivated, and they're ready to go home and do things. And I kind of feel like it's a good way to start the year. Like we have this really awesome event at the beginning, get everybody all pumped up, and then hopefully people carry with that with them for the rest of the year. And I also want to mention, go ahead.
No, I would just say that I'm hoping that people, like we touched on earlier, like what I would like to see from this, and maybe it's already happened, is people that are there who are experts in their field, right? That are, you're a tech guy, you're a scientist, whatever it is, and find a new path in these same directions, or something that circumvents that entire direction if that entire thing is problematic. It's like that, like we're talking about the new internet, or new financial structures, whether that's cryptographic direction or anything else, like finding those avenues and building something out through this community that can actually rival the technological control structure. Like that's what I guarantee there are people out there doing it. They usually get tapped by other mainstream elements that kind of co-ops or manipulates it. But I'm hoping that from this community that can happen. That would be amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And then that's one other point on that is, so for people, you can go to the website, thepeoplesreset.org/speakers. You can see our full lineup of speakers. We've started posting the schedule with the talk titles and everything. You're going to see some names that you probably recognize and know, and then you're going to see other people that you've never heard of. But I encourage you to check them all out, because we spend the entire year curating, and as I travel and I meet people that are working on great projects, I'm like, you need to come share this with our audience. And they might be people that you've never heard of, that don't have a following, that don't have millions of people paying attention to them, but they're just somebody doing really, really powerful work in their specific field and their specific, kind of expertise. And I think that's really what it's about. And at the same time, we know that the audience and people have a lot to share. I just wanted to mention, as we're recording this, we just ended our New Year's Eve sale, but I will, after we finish this and before, as it's released, if anybody on the TLAV audience does want to come, and you have less than 30 days, but if you think you can make it, If you go buy a ticket and use the coupon code TLAV, just TLAV, we'll give you 15% off the ticket. So the normal price is $222. It'll be $189 for you to get a ticket for that. And I'll leave that open. It's Thursday today, so I'll leave that open until Sunday night. So anybody hearing this, if you do want to come, and again, I highly encourage you to, because you were saying that a moment ago, Ryan, the face-to-face interaction, there's nothing like this. Right. Too many people in our movements spend their whole lives just interacting with these ideas and with this freedom community, so to speak, through the internet, and they never get involved. I don't even, like, even if you can't come to Mexico, go to a local event in your community. But if you can, even if you're like, oh, it's going to take time, energy, I'm going to cost, I promise you, invest in yourself. You will not regret this. You will come down, you'll have an amazing time. You'll go home feeling inspired. And if you can't, tune in online for free, take the ideas, get inspired by them, and implement them in your own communities, because that's what really matters. It's not just about coming to Mexico. It's about each of us then taking the ideas back home and implementing them. But yeah, I'll go ahead and make that coupon code TLAV, 15% off the tickets for anybody who wants to do that before Sunday night.
Outstanding, man. Thank you. And for those watching, actually, this wasn't the one. Well, I'll get it right. Oh, I think it just went to the, I'll include the link in the show notes. That it's not, I don't have it on here now, but the link that what will be listed below will basically be the affiliate link code for TLAV. So as well as the TLAV link, you can also, whatever you end up purchasing through that will support the TLAV organization. So really appreciate that. And I hope you guys will all make it. I mean, just to, you know, there's different avenues of this. Like I once started I'm blanking on the term of the network, the Freedom Cells network, and ultimately started that. But then, you know, there's just so much going on. I've barely been able to keep up on it. You know, it's like, so the point is just, this is an easy way for us to be together and enjoy things and hang out and think and plan. And, you know, it's like, it's powerful. So I hope to see you all there. And Derrick, I've always enjoyed our conversations, man. I hope people will listen to what you're researching about GMOs or anything else, because it's, you know, again, the kind of intersection of this very conversation, like what we're talking about with the greater reset or the people's reset is, you know, the reason is we do need to actively think, not just point out these problems, but think about ways to circumvent what is coming. And I'll end with this clip that I've played a lot in the past, but it's, you know, not to, I guess, basically take that nice ending note and play something that's scary, but ultimately, to think about it though, this is where this is going. And really this video is about where we already are and how we got there. And the point is that what the people's reset is about is trying, like we're highlighting, finding paths to get away from where this seems to be inevitably going, but is not absolute. We can change our path. And I think that we need to, you know, use this to find those ways, because what we're seeing here is something that really does keep me up at night. And I know we can fight it. So thank you, Derrick. Any final thoughts for us on the way out?
Thanks for having me on, brother. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who does support TLAV as well as support my work. I do appreciate you guys. And yeah, as you said, Ryan, like we still have a chance to shape the direction of the future, or at the very least to protect ourselves and our families and make sure we can thrive through what we know is coming.
Yeah, well said. All right. Well, thank you. As always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
The Jacobardi case was one of the great judicial moments in world history. And the public was totally unaware it was actually happening as the process was being engaged. General Electric and Professor Jacobardi went to the patent office with a little microbe that eats up oil spills. They said they had modified this microbe in the laboratory, and therefore it was an invention. The patent office, the US government, took a look at this, quote, invention, and they said, no way. The patent statutes don't cover living things. This is not an invention. Turned down. Then General Electric and Dr. Jacobardi appealed to the U.S. Customs Court of Appeal. And to everyone's surprise, by a 3-2 decision, they overrode the patent office. We bring good things to life. And they said, this microbe looks more like a detergent or a reagent than a horse or a honeybee. I laughed because they didn't understand basic biology. It looked like a chemical to them. Had it had an antenna or eyes or wings or legs, it would never have crossed their table and been patented. Then the patent office appealed. And what the public should realize now is the patent office was very clear that you can't patent life. My organization provided the main amicus curiae brief. If you allow the patent on this microbe, we argued, it means that without any congressional guidance or public discussion, corporations will own the blueprints of life. When they made the decision, we lost by 5-4, and Chief Justice Warren Burger said, sure, some of these are big issues, but we think this is a small decision. 7 years later, the U.S. Patent Office issued a one-sentence decree. You can patent anything in the world that's alive except a full-birth human being. We've all been hearing about the announcement that we have mapped the human genome, but what the public doesn't know is now there's a great race by genomic companies and biotech companies and life science companies to find the treasure in the map. The treasure are the individual genes that make up the blueprint of the human race. Every time they capture a gene and isolate it, these biotech companies claim it as intellectual property. The breast cancer gene, the cystic fibrosis gene, it goes on and on and on. If this goes unchallenged in the world community, within less than 10 years, a handful of global companies will own directly or through license the actual genes that make up the evolution of our species. And they're now beginning to patent the genomes of every other creature on this planet. In the age of biology, the politics is going to sort out between those who believe life first has intrinsic value, and therefore we should choose technologies and commercial venues that honor the intrinsic value. And then we're going to have people who believe, look, life is simply utility. It's commercial fare, and they will line up with the idea to let the marketplace be the ultimate arbiter of all of the age of biology.